places. The micro-telco entrepreneur, or the franchisee, is the one who interacts directly with the small businesses, the homes in his community. And then there's the telco. The telco is in an alliance with the franchise organization. It could be a revenue sharing, it could be a service contract, but the telco does not have to deal directly with each entrepreneur. They can deal just with the franchise. So it's streamlining the regulation and streamlining the connectivity requirements of the model. And finally, the franchise ideally is an organization with a social objective as well that can implement projects that will leverage the connectivity for social impact. Like any model, when it goes from theory to practice, it needs to be adapted to the reality of the context. In Guatemala, it continues to be very similar to the original model, although it turned out we could only afford one microtelco instead of 3 or 4 because of the cost of the technology. But in general, the structure is still very much similar to the original model.
In Colombia as well, we started off with 3 towns and 3 locations where we're going to deploy it, again, with the entrepreneur, with the franchise organization. But the model has been actually so successful, and we'll discuss a little bit more further along, that the government has actually adapted this, and so it's being replicated all over the country, and this is now the new policy position of the government for rural telecommunications through their Digital Territories Initiative.
In Paraguay, the model started out in the same way as it did in Guatemala and Colombia, but it became increasingly evident that it was not going to work because of the monopolies and the regulatory limitations of the country. So at the request of the stakeholders in the project, it was shifted to a subsidy program targeting 100 organizations throughout the country, providing a 2-year subsidy of connectivity, schools and hospitals and that kind of organization, leveraging the connectivity to better improve their work.
Now, what did we find in terms of the regulatory environment? Okay, in Guatemala, it's probably the single most liberal marketplace for telecommunications you will probably find, so much so to a fault. They actually privatized or sold off the entire radio frequency spectrum. This includes the 2.4 and 5.8 that are normally reserved for Wi-Fi. So in fact, you would have to pay for Wi-Fi services there if need be. Now, however, on the positive side, there's a very low barrier to entry. For $100, you can pretty much do any kind of telecom services in the country. Now, Colombia is a bit more cumbersome. It's a country in transition. However, the process of reform has been slow. They are open to change, but again, it has been a little bit slow, and that has made it a little bit more difficult to work in that environment, and it's taken longer than expected. Paraguay, oh boy, Paraguay. Well, Paraguay is very, very difficult to work with from the regulatory standpoint. It's got some very entrenched interests. It's a very politicized environment. There's issues of corruption. And even though in the initial dialogue there seemed to be a lot of political will to change, because of the entrenched interests, this just was simply not possible.
One of the most critical factors of the success of a project is who you select as your implementing partner. In Guatemala, we started out with an organization that was running USAID-funded telecenters called Agexport. But after 7 months of getting nowhere in terms of signing an MOU with them, the project selected a different nonprofit, Planeta en Línea, who focuses on rural technology production. This organization also added significant funding of their own to the project.
Now, in contrast, in Colombia, we ended up integrating both functions of the franchise organization and the telco with Avantel. They're a very aggressive and interesting organization, and they even asked us the question, couldn't we do both functions? And after some significant dialogue and negotiations, we were amenable to the idea and the concept, and it's been very successful to date. They were also very interested in making significant investments into the project.
In Paraguay, we selected a nonprofit as well that has worked very well. Fundación Paraguaya is mainly focused on microcredits and on building entrepreneurs for the past 10, 20 years. And they've also been a very good, honest broker for the project.
So how did things go with the connectivity partners? Well, first in Guatemala, we started with Metrovia Unitel, which are really sister companies. They own the 3.5 radio spectrum, as well as they have an exclusivity contract to use the NextNet platform, now owned by Motorola. But the best part about them is that they had a turnkey solution with advanced functionality such as prepaid systems and so on that made them a really great partner. But that also gave them an additional leverage point when it came to negotiations. Now, in Colombia, we used Avantel. Again, we integrated the function of the franchise together with the telecom partner. And they're a very small yet dynamic operator, comparatively speaking, within the marketplace. They do have 280,000 customers willing to invest, and they were willing to invest in the business model and in terms of equipment and operations of the franchise organization. Now, when it comes to Paraguay, we needed to work with Tigo. They were the largest broadband telecom provider in the country. Mainly their platform is based on wireless technology, so they had experience using that, and they helped a lot in terms of going over some of the major hurdles in the regulatory environment because they already had the technology, the frequencies, and the operator's licenses.
Now, connectivity is important, but context and the services that make the connectivity useful are also very important. In Guatemala, we did several projects in e-government, e-commerce, and e-learning. We worked with a local school to help them improve their administrative and educational processes using the internet and technology tools. With the municipal government, we scanned in thousands of birth certificates back to 1944, reducing the amount of time it takes to find birth certificates from 8 hours to 1 minute. In the tourism sector, we launched a portal of Tecpan, the community where the microtelco was launched, along with the Chamber of Commerce.
Now, in Colombia, we had a much larger community of stakeholders. In fact, we started off with just a handful, and it's really taken on a life of its own, including about 7 ministries that cover national services provision, including tax payments, e-commerce, and public service payments. As well, there's a great deal of education and e-learning materials online in the portal for these communities, and we're really trying to focus that the content is contextualized and accessible for the socioeconomic conditions and activities of those specific communities where we're launching services.
In Paraguay, because of the nature of the project, the connectivity recipients are implementing their own context projects. Based with the connectivity, they can, depending on whether they're a school or a nonprofit organization, they're using the connectivity to improve their own services to their community. So it's implicit in the model there. In terms of technology, in Guatemala, we selected the technology through an RFP process, trying to figure out the best way to connect wirelessly on a non-open frequency, a large community. And the winners were NextNet Wireless, now owned by Motorola. It's a nomadic mobile WiMAX platform that's very easy to deploy. It just works, and it has about 5-kilometer coverage.
Now, in Colombia, the process is not yet finalized because we were trying to access the 802.16e standard. That's the mobile WiMAX, which just came online recently. The providers during the first RFP process bid certain dates of delivery, and these aren't being complied with, so we've had to go in and do a second round of RFP.
In Paraguay, we went with the technology platform that Tigo already had, which is an Alvarion fixed WiMAX. They already had a large deployment with 60% of the broadband market in the country, so they wanted to continue using their own technology platform.